Hello, and thank you all for joining us, and welcome to this first session of our online event, Synchronicity, Mind and Matter. I'm James G. Barbieri, Associate Program Director at the Pauli Center, and I'll be your host for today. Today we also have Eleanor Peet, Program Director of the Pauli Center, and Maureen Doolan, who is the co-founder of the Pauli Center. Before we begin, I'd just like to give everyone a couple of Zoom rules for this session. During the presentation, we ask participants to turn off your microphone just to ensure a better quality audio. For this reason, we may mute you if we hear any background noise, but don't worry, this is not to silence anyone, it's just to ensure the better audio.
You said to mute it.
Yes, please, just during the presentations. Then if you'd like to ask a question later or make a contribution to the discussion, there will be a discussion area after the presentation. You can use either the raise your hand function on Zoom or just physically raise your hand, and if I spot you, you can turn on your microphone. Otherwise, you can even write a question in the chat section of the Zoom call. And please do use the chat section, as it's a great way to share thoughts on the presentation with other participants. We also invite all participants to turn on your video camera, as we believe that seeing everyone's faces and reactions creates a nice, inclusive education environment. However, if you don't feel comfortable doing so, feel free to keep it off. All sessions will be recorded for archival purposes. The recordings will be available to all, both participants who have a ticket and for people who couldn't make it to the live event. We tried to make the recordings available by Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. But one thing I do want to mention is that the recordings are meant for participants only. So please, if you could not share the recordings with non-participants, and please don't share them on social media. Okay, now we can begin with this event. At the start of each session, we have the honor of opening with a poem by Richard Berengarten to create a space that will help us enter the world of synchronicity. Richard, who is a fellow at Downing College at Cambridge University, is a prolific writer, poet, and editor. Throughout this series, Richard will read poems from his book, Notness, which includes a section of 10 sonnets entitled On Synchronicity, and his ambitious Changing, an homage to the I Ching. At the first session, Richard will also introduce himself before reading the first of his poems. Richard is actually here with us today. After the poem, we will introduce Remo Roth, who will give his presentation entitled Synchronicity Quest. Remo is a Jungian analyst and researcher in the field of psychophysical reality, or unus mundus, and a former student and collaborator of Marie-Louise von Franz. Lately, he's been working as an interpreter of synchronicity and archetypal dreams, as well as being a healing practitioner. After the poem, Shantina Sabadini, the director of the Pauli Center and chair of this event, will say a few words, and then Remo will give his presentation, which should be around an hour, and then after a short break, we'll move on to Q&A and discussion. And now, to open the series, I'll pass it over to you, Shantina. Welcome.
Thank you, James. Yeah, so a few words to introduce this series. Let me start with questions. Is the world magic? Is the world alive? Is the world speaking to us? Is the world teaching us? There are moments when we definitely feel, yes, it is. What makes those moments so special? How can we seek them? Richard's poems can guide us. One of the verses we'll hear says, when you no longer look, it's then you see. It's just like in those puzzles in which the image is hidden in what looks like a garble of patches of color and light. It takes an unfocused gaze to see the pattern. The same is true about synchronicity. The willful analytical I has a function in dealing with practical everyday matters, but it's no help in revealing the subtle messages of synchronicity. The revelation requires the other half of the brain, the right brain, the intuitive holistic hemisphere. The theme of synchronicity has been central in the work of the Paris Center for 20 years. With good reason, I believe, because the work of the Paris Center focuses on the pattern that connects, not on knowing, but on knowledge, on the subtle connections, not the obvious. I would say that the work of the Paris Center has been inspired by synchronicity all along, starting with that momentous synchronicity of David and Maureen ending up in this village on top of a hill in the middle of Tuscany, in this place in which the future has an ancient heart. So I think it's very appropriate we celebrate the start of the third decade of the Paris Center at a time of great changes by reconnecting to our traditional synchronicity. And I'm proud and happy that we managed to bring to this event a variety of approaches and perspectives, a remarkable team of speakers, and a wonderful host of participants. So let's all enjoy this special opportunity.
Thank you, Centeno. And now we have an introduction by Richard.
Here's the first poem.
Oh, sorry, it's the wrong one. That was the poem. Introduction.
Here's the first poem. When anxious waiting stops. When anxious waiting stops and wants diffuse, and neither presses hard for consequence, then new views open and receptive cues bathe in a kind of floodlit innocence. Through bones and organs and their folds and layers, fording the body's semi-porous skin, the unexpected may come streaming in on sudden flood, catching you unawares. When you no longer look, it's then you see. When you stop listening consciously, you hear unnoticed pattern, innate harmony, and plural demarcations disappear. Through mists of dream and daydreams, musing haze, the self itself attains clear, focused gaze.
So that was Richard Berengarten with his poem. I believe now we can move on to Remo. Remo, welcome to this session.
Yeah, thank you. First, I would like to say something to Rachel's poem. In 2 sentences, he says all this, half of this from the second part of my lecture that I will explain to you. So it was so fantastic for me that he really took this poem as an introduction to my lecture. When he wrote, when you no longer look, it's then you see. When you stop listening consciously, you hear. It's exactly what I call Synchronicity Quest. So now we can end the session. No, I'd like to tell you now my way, to understand what Jung means with synchronicity. And so I'd like to describe to you my personal approach to the phenomenon that C.G. Jung, the depth psychologist, and Wolfgang Pauli, the quantum physicist and Nobel Prize winner, had called synchronicity. We know about the extremely intensive and profound exchange of ideas between the two since the publication of the correspondence in the book C.G. Jung und Wolfgang Pauli, Ein Briefwechsel, published in 1992, which was 9 years later also published in English in 2001 as Atom and Archetype, the Pauli-Jung letters. Now, can you show slide 1, please, James?
Can everyone see okay?
Slide 1, please.
Can you see?
Yeah.
Perfect.
You see here the two books, at the left side, the German original, and at the right side, the English translation. When we talk about synchronicity, we usually assume that this phenomenon consists of two or more events, the first of which is a dream or a vision. That is an internal subjective phenomenon, while the second consists of an external objective phenomenon. For example, one dreams of an encounter with a friend, and shortly thereafter, he or she runs across our path. Mostly one is surprised about this coincidence. However, one does not have any further thoughts about it. But actually, C.G. Jung wanted us to think about such coincidences, that we should find out their meaning. The realization of such a meaning should make us more conscious about the necessary changes in our behavior or attitudes. In my case, synchronicities served above all for the development of my creative insights. Since these represent an actual new creation in consciousness, their significance as actual incarnational phenomena became more and more clear to me. C.G. Jung's definition of synchronicity is broader than the coincidence of a dream and an external event. He speaks more generally of a coincidence of subjective and objective happenings, which just cannot be explained causally. So in Jung's definition, the internal subjective phenomenon does not need to be a dream or a vision. As in my case, the subjective fact can also be, for example, a creative problem which occupies us intensively, but to which we have not yet found a solution. In this case, even the task of solving this problem may still be completely unconscious. That is, we have only a dim inkling that we should set about solving this constellated problem. The latter case formed the background of one of my first synchronicities, which I experienced in 1975. It turned out that this synchronicity was the beginning of the creative development that eventually led me to the definition of what I call today Synchronicity Quest. Jung defines synchronicity as a parapsychological phenomenon. I had been interested in parapsychology from a very early age. A dream in the early days of my psychoanalysis moved my analyst to recommend that I look into the phenomenon of synchronicity. Then occurred the Synchronicity with Jung's Synchronicity article of January 1975. The first event of the Synchronicity of January 22, 1975 was as follows. The Parapsychological Society of Switzerland invites me to join a lecture in Zurich. The lecture is entitled as follows: C.G. Jung and Parapsychology, with special consideration of synchronicity. 2 days later, on January 24, 1975, I happened to find in an antiquarian bookstore the book by C.G. Jung and Pauli, Wolfgang Pauli, Naturerklärung und Psyche, published in 1952, which contains Jung's original article on the principle of synchronicity. Can you show slide 2, please? Yeah, this is the book that I found then. In the strict sense, this is not a synchronicity, but in the broader sense of Jung's definition, it is a synchronicity, namely just a coincidence of subjective and objective happenings, which just cannot be explained causally, of which one feels, I stress, one feels that they contain a common meaning. My inner creative aspect was already intensely occupied with the phenomenon at that time, but I was not aware of it at all. It is the introverted feeling that connects the two events of synchronicity. One feels an almost magic connection of the two events, which one cannot explain rationally. Wolfgang Pauli, the quantum physicist and Nobel Prize winner, has called this radiation mana. Mana means in Polynesia that the life energy, scientifically spoken, an energy of higher order. It is precisely this activation of mana that I always feel as what I call an expectation of synchronicity. One senses that something is in the air, but does not know what exactly. In the case of this specific synchronicity, an intense feeling told me that it would correspond to my life's task to deal more intensively with the phenomenon of synchronicity. I began my studies at the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich in the spring of 1975, a few months after the above synchronicity. And since, as I said, parapsychology fascinated me, I had already intensively studied Jung's synchronicity hypothesis at the beginning. So even before I started my studies, this synchronicity showed me that one of my most essential tasks would be to further research and develop this phenomenon discovered by Jung and Pauli. Naturerklärung und Psyche, the book containing both Pauli's Kepler article and Jung's article on synchronicity, was published, as I said, in 1952. Already 3 years earlier, on June 22, 1949, Jung had sent Pauli a first draft of this article in a letter, asking him to comment on it critically. Pauli helped Jung, among other things, to transform the physical terms from dreamlike images of the imagination, as Pauli said to his knowledge of physics, into their true meaning. For example, this differentiation applies to such essential physical terms as radioactivity and field, which Jung equated. Also, the term radioactivity is based on an acausal background, and the term field on a causal one. Thus, Pauli could finally inform Jung that, I quote, the final chapter 4 of the Synchronicity article, considered from the standpoint of modern physics, is now unassailable. In 1951, Jung conjectures that there must be a basis common to the physical and the psychical, which, however, he calls transcendental. Finally, in 1953, the depth psychologist writes to the quantum physicist that he has found an alchemist of the 16th century who speaks of a world behind the division into outside and inside, Gerardus Dorneus, who lived in the second half of the 16th century, who called this world the unus mundus, the one world or unified world. Pauli accepts this hypothesis of Jung of a unified world behind the Cartesian split and calls the unus mundus the psychophysical reality. As a physicist, Pauli's use of the word reality means that a phenomenon which is observable. This is very important. I agree with this view. This means that this world no longer remains transcendental, as Jung assumes, but that it is observable. In time, I realized that synchronicities correspond to such observable phenomena that are incarnated out of psychophysical reality into our world. The psychophysical background of synchronicity, Jung and Pauli could not yet verify in a unified theory. During the last 40 years, I therefore had to extract it in the course of my research, and I will now discuss with you this psychophysical background of synchronicity by means of some slides. Slide 3, please. Yeah. In this slide, you see the split world of today. Since the scientific revolution of the 17th century, when the introduction of mathematics, especially by Johannes Kepler, split the world into a quantitative and a qualitative part, we are confronted with the fact that the inner world, the world of the psyche, is separated from the outer world, the world of natural science, matter, and physical energy. This external world is quantitatively measurable, which is why it is called objective. Since Sigmund Freud and C.G. Jung, the other part, the inner qualitative world, has been rediscovered, but it is regarded by natural science as not existing, since it cannot be measured with physical tools and thus remains subjective. It is the world of depth psychology, the psyche, or according to Jung, the world of the objective psyche, the world of dreams, visions, and intuitions. The two worlds are based, as Jung has conjectured, on a common background, the so-called unus mundus, or in Pauli's definition, psychophysical reality. As I said, this hypothesis remains a speculation, which can only be proven if we can observe energetic transformations rooted in this world. As you've seen, towards the end of their correspondence, Jung and Pauli discussed the possibility of such a unified world, the unus mundus or psychophysical reality, behind the spatio-temporal world, based on a hypothesis of the Hermetic alchemist Gerardus Dorneus from the second half of the 16th century. As a natural scientist, Pauli demanded that such a world must be observable. However, he and Jung had not yet been able to formulate the theory of synchronicity on the background of the psychophysical reality. Slide 3A, please. In the Middle Ages, however, there was a solution, though only as a symbolic procedure. Its result is symbolized as a seal of Solomon or Star of David. As we have seen, the process is called the Holy Wedding or Conjunctio. In it, the psyche at first unified with the spirit in the heaven, abandons the spirit and descends to a middle realm between spirit and matter. There, the psyche becomes subtle. Simultaneously, matter ascends to this middle realm, and it also becomes subtle. The two unify and create the unus mundus, or psychophysical reality, symbolized as the seal. In this way, the seal, as well as the unus mundus, or psychophysical reality, are regarded as being subtle. This is very, very important. They are regarded as being subtle. This subtle world is observable, though only with a subtle consciousness, the ego in half-trance, or what I call the eros ego. In the continuation of my lecture, I will describe the eros ego determined by introverted feeling and what I call vegetative sensation, which are decisive for my understanding of synchronicity. And I will show that there were some synchronicities that led me to the discovery that such an alternate consciousness is conducive for the observation of synchronicities. Slide 4, please. We have seen that the symbol of the Holy Wedding and its result is the Star of David or Seal of Solomon. In contemporary language, we call this world psychophysical reality behind or even beyond the split in an external and an internal world. Based on my experience with very many archetypal dreams and many synchronicities, I have hypothesized that this psychophysical world exists and that observable phenomena happen in it. Synchronicities are these observable energetic transformation phenomena. Synchronicities are therefore different from the observable events of natural science because, unlike the latter, they happen on the background of psychophysical reality. This means especially that the energy of synchronicities consists neither in physical nor in objective psychic energy postulated by C.G. Jung. I postulate that this difference is also observable in that a kind of mana, a magic energy, emanates from them. Slide 5, please. The energy of higher order emanating from synchronicity, what Pauli called mana, is a magic energy, since no mathematical quantitative effect can be calculated for it. This energy can only be experienced through introverted feeling and what I call vegetative sensation. For the moment, this sensation experience is not yet understandable, but when I later will demonstrate the so-called synchronicity with the journal Synchronicity, you can much more understand what I mean. Because of the feeling and sensation of mana, the experience of synchronicities always leaves an observer deeply moved and with an unshakable feeling of meaningful connection of the synchronistic events, provided one allows the sense of miracle associated with them. In this way, the observer becomes a participant, what distances him from natural science, which proceeds from the hypothesis of the distanced observer. I would like to stress once again that we can only feel the magic of this energy with the help of the introverted feeling function and the vegetative sensation function. In my opinion, in this way, we experience the third form of energy sought by the quantum physicist and Nobel Prize winner alongside physical energy and C.G. Jung's objective psychic energy. The observation of a synchronicity corresponds to the potential incarnation of the magic energy, the mana, from the psychophysical world into our spatio-temporal world. The instrument of observation is the introverted consciousness, and above all, the introverted feeling, which intensely senses the connection of the inner and outer event of synchronicity. The introverted feeling thereby generates a certainty about the meaningful connection, the above-mentioned unshakability, which, however, remains subjective. Slide 6, please. In order to expand this subjective certainty into an objective truth, the interpretation of synchronicity is necessary. With its help, the symbolic sense of synchronicity can be verbalized and thus made accessible to other people. The meaning of the synchronicity becomes objective. With these explanations, I have described the archetypal background of the synchronicity phenomenon, or even the psychophysical background, as I see it. So to say, the necessary preconditions for the possibility of its occurrence. In short, it is the idea that synchronicities contain a magic energy rooted in the unus mundus or psychophysical reality, and that it is our task to observe and interpret them to find new conscious knowledge. But what is not explained yet are the necessary preconditions of consciousness for the observation of this magic energetic happening on the background of the psychophysical reality. Or in other words, what instrument of observation, what kind of consciousness is necessary for synchronicities to become visible and recognizable at all? With time, I noticed that the number of observed synchronicities can be increased if the consciousness dims. Depth psychology calls this consciousness un abaissement du niveau mental, a slackening of the density of consciousness, and it means this in a devaluating manner. This was especially the case in C.G. Jung's view. In the English language, one also speaks in a much more positive way of an altered consciousness, of half-trance. This consciousness corresponds roughly to the dream time of the Aboriginals, the indigenous people of Australia, a state between dream and what we call reality. Today, I call this the Eros consciousness, which is complementary to the Logos consciousness of the natural scientists. While the Logos consciousness contains thinking as its main function and wants to separate, to analyze, the Eros consciousness is guided by the principle of feeling and Eros in general. It is synthetic, unifying, therefore a very good prerequisite for the observation of synchronicities, the observation of the unification of the inner and outer event. In this way, it became clear to me why so many natural scientists cannot acknowledge synchronicity. It presupposes that one can let oneself fall into this altered consciousness, into a kind of dimmed consciousness, which quite consciously switches off thinking. Moreover, the connection of the two events is established by the introverted feeling. One feels intensely and unshakably that the two phenomena belong together, an attitude that most natural scientists resist because they want to keep the individual consciousness and especially introverted feeling out of the whole thing, the so-called scientific objectivity. In my opinion, I had gained a completely new view of the synchronicity phenomenon with the above insights. I ask myself which transformation the consciousness must accomplish to its perception. A question which obviously not too many Jungians had asked in the 80s of the last century, since in my 6 years at the Jung Institute, no one had ever talked about synchronicity. However, my teacher, Marie-Louise von Franz, was very supportive of this question of the transformation of consciousness, even enthusiastic about it when I submitted it to her. Slide 7, please. To recap, in the course of the last 40 years, the following conclusions crystallized in my mind. Dreams are rooted in the layer that Sigmund Freud called the subconscious and C.G. Jung called the unconscious. Synchronicities, on the other hand, are rooted in psychophysical reality or unus mundus, behind the split into inside and outside, behind the split into depth psychology and natural science. Synchronicities are incarnation phenomena from the psychophysical reality into our spatio-temporal world. Synchronicities express themselves symbolically at first, which means pictorially, but according to Jung, they have to be translated into a verbal language in order to fathom their meaning. And for the observation of the external event of synchronicity, a dimmed consciousness, symbolically spoken, a moon consciousness or eros, complementary to the sun consciousness or logos of natural science, is necessary. After I have explained to you the results of my research work of the last 40 years, I would like to show you now how I had discovered the way consciousness should transform to observe synchronicities. This way, I can also demonstrate what I mean with the term Synchronicity Quest. I got the first inkling of the transformation of consciousness for the observation of synchronicity phenomena during a closer study of C.G. Jung's Scarab synchronicity. The only synchronicity that C.G. Jung published is the so-called Scarab synchronicity. A patient, completely caught up in her rational intellect, told him a dream about a scarab, a symbol of rebirth in ancient Egypt. Jung listened, but was at the moment, as it were, spread out into the environment. In this telepathic mode, he heard a knock on the window pane behind him. Spontaneously, he opened it and caught a rose shaver, the closest relative to the scarab in Central Europe. He showed it to the patient with the words, "Here you have your scarab." At that moment, the patient's ego, trapped in the rational logos, was abruptly transformed. Her rigid logos fell away from her, and she was able to return to her original typology as a feeling type. Her distortion neurosis, as Jung called it, was cured. And this was an actual rebirth of her consciousness. It is generally common for a psychotherapist to focus intensely on the patient. In this case, however, Jung was, so to speak, spread out into the environment. Probably without being aware of it, he was in an abaissement du niveau mental, a slackening of the density of consciousness, in a telepathic state in which the consciousness, symbolically speaking, becomes field-like, wave-like, or watery, eliminating directed thinking and will-based action. I also call this consciousness the eros consciousness. Only through this transformation of his consciousness from the particle state, symbolical sin, of logos to the wave state of eros, could the depth psychologist perceive the knocking of the rose shaver on the window at all. His medial intuition also guessed that this knocking must have to do with the condition of his patient, so he opened the window, so to speak, in semi-trance, and thus enabled this synchronicity. What I present to you here was, of course, anything but conscious to me in the time of the described synchronicity about Jung's synchronicity article. But the problem seemed to settle in my unconscious, as for example, the next synchronicity shows, which happened 4 years after the first one of 1974. I was discussing with one of my clients the German translation of the book Journey to Ixtlan by Carlos Castañeda, in which an imagination method of the South American medicine man Don Juan Matus is shown. In this, one fades out of logos consciousness into an altered state, into semi-trance, and then experiences shamanistic journeys. On the cover of the book was a man who had a halo instead of a head. 2 days later, a weekly magazine to which I subscribed published a report on René Magritte, the surrealist Belgian painter, and on the cover is a picture of a man who has a halo instead of a head. Please show slide 8. Here you see the two. I was really more than astonished. In 2 days, these two happenings, and so for me it was clear that they belong together. The motive of the headless man obviously began to haunt me. I therefore read the article Akephalos, which means headless, in the Handwörterbuch des deutschen Aberglaubens by a man called Hannes Bechtold-Stäubli. I knew I had to solve the problem, but I forgot the content of the article again. Clarity about how this solution could look like was created only by another synchronicity of September 25, 1981, a good 6 years after the first one of 1975, and 2 years after the Castañeda-Magritte headless synchronicity. I call it the synchronicity with the Journal Synchronicité of September 25, 1981. In the autumn of 1981, I became intensively involved with the phenomenon of synchronicity. I came across an earlier dream in which a man called Locher strongly recommends that I deal with the problem of twins. I had only a nodding acquaintance with this man, thus nothing special came to mind about him. Here we have to resort to a special feature of Jungian dream interpretation, the symbolic interpretation. Accustomed to such an interpretation, it spontaneously occurred to me that symbolically Loch, this means hole, could mean the emptiness of consciousness in Buddhism. So, Herr Locher, in English, Mr. Hole or Mr. Hollow, is the person who empties his consciousness, as happens in Buddhist meditation. Regarding twin, a remark by Marie-Louise von Franz came to my mind, in which she said that twins in dreams, interpreted as symbol, very often points to synchronicity. Synchronicities are usually twins in the sense that an inner and an outer phenomenon come together, which we instinctively feel are somehow meaningfully connected. I would like to emphasize here once again how important the introverted feeling is for the experience of synchronicity events. If we do not allow this feeling of belonging together, the two events remain separate and we dismiss them as mere meaningless coincidence. When I wrote down the above remarks, whole equals emptiness of consciousness and twins equals synchronicity, I felt a strange sensation in the region of my heart. It was a quiet twinge under the left side of the breastbone. This quiet twinge is an expression of the heart plexus of the vegetative nervous system, what Tantrism calls the heart chakra. I concentrated on this quiet twinge and noticed that this sensation triggered a body reaction. I felt that my body wanted to move. I continued to listen to myself and was instructed that I should go to the library of the Jung Institute in Küsnach and there make a copy of the article on Acephalos, the headless one, from this Handwörterbuch des deutschen Aberglaubens, which I had read fleetingly a good 2 years ago and then forgotten. I followed this bodily reaction and mental inspiration. It was a kind of command from the unconscious and spontaneously went to this library. After copying the article, I happened to see on the display board of the new publications a magazine I had never seen before. It was entitled Synchronicity. It was the first issue of the journal from 1981. And it seems that it is not published anymore today. Let us now recall the dream. I had interpreted the man of the dream, Herr Locher, Mr. Hole or Mr. Hollow, as the man who hollows his logos consciousness. Of course, this means that he abandons thinking and willful action. And we remember also the symbol of the twins as the two events of synchronicity. When I now became Mr. Hollow myself, which means I entered the dimmed consciousness in a spontaneous action, I found the outer twin, the journal Synchronicity, corresponding to the inner twin, the hollow man who deals with synchronicity. The synchronicity about synchronicity thus tells us that precisely this dim state, symbolically the archevalos, the headless one, is the necessary condition for experiencing the external event. Only in this way could the synchronicity happen at all. What I like to demonstrate here is the necessity of the verbalization for finding the meaning of a synchronicity. This way, the felt meaning becomes objective, namely as a statement that the dimmed consciousness, the semi-trance, is the necessary condition for the enabling of a synchronicity. Slide 9, please. To recap, the first event was a dream A man called Locho, Mr. Hole or Mr. Hollow, strongly recommends me to deal with the problem of twins. The second event, during reading the dream, I noted Mr. Locho equals Mr. Hole or Mr. Hollow equals emptying, directed thinking, and willful action. And note 2, twins equals the inner and the outer event of synchronicity. Then I had a quiet twinge in the region of my heart, a manifestation in the heart plexus of the vegetative nervous system, the Anahata chakra. Concentration on my heart in the state of the dimmed consciousness or altered ego. I feel in this way that my body wants to move, and a voice out of my heart commands to copy the article Archetypal, the headless, in the Jung Institute in Zurich. Then I spontaneously move to the Jung Institute. After having copied the article Archetypal by chance, I find the first issue of the journal Synchronicity. The dimmed eros ego finds the outer event of the synchronicity. And interpretation, abandoning the logos ego, which means thinking and willful action, leads to the akephalos, the headless one. The akephalos, the headless ego, the altered ego, spontaneously finds the outer event of synchronicity. And the conclusion was, only in this way could the synchronicity happen at all. Had I waited for the next day, perhaps they had taken away this synchronicity, this issue of the journal Synchronicity, and the synchronicity couldn't have happened anymore. So you see how important it is that one enters spontaneously the outer event, in my case, by listening to what happened in my heart chakra or heart plexus. And this means that then in this moment, I changed into the vegetative nervous system. I listened to the vegetative event in my heart chakra or heart plexus. I wasn't in my head anymore, and only in this way I was able to spontaneously go to the Jung Institute, and there the synchronicity happened. Yeah, then I would like to show, I must say, perhaps it is not, how shall I say this? This synchronicity moved me deeply. And this is perhaps not understandable too much, because this is my special, it was only in my case, I don't find the words in English. I was deeply moved. And when I talk with synchronicity to other people, then they say, oh yes, maybe, may not be. So sometimes, or in many cases, other people cannot feel the content of such a synchronicity. And this is why living in such a synchronistic state sometimes makes you very, very lonely. And now I would like to show you so-called amplifications, what Jung calls amplifications. what means that we look in the history and mythology of parallel phenomena or parallel phenomena that that show the same or similar meaning. This is very important to me because in this way I feel that I'm somehow together with these old ancient phenomena. The headless man, the Kephalos, was a widespread motif in the Middle Ages. It probably owes its widespread use to an account by the Church Father Augustine in his book Good God State. In Hippo, in present-day Algeria, where he was a bishop, he claims to have seen many men and women who had no heads, but their eyes fixed on their chests. Now please show slide 10. Here you see these people. Here, you see no head, no head. The headless were also called belly faces. This points to the idea that instead of the organs of perception on the head, especially the ears and eyes, they had those on the torso. In the illustrations, these are clearly positioned in the region of the heart. Hearing and seeing were therefore located in the region of the heart in these fantasy figures. This characteristic now spontaneously reminds us of Herr Locher, of Mr. Hole or Mr. Hollow, who obviously corresponds to a consciousness in a state of semi-trance, in an abaissement. I would therefore like to emphasize once again that my synchronicity with the German Synchronicity involves the realization that this state of semi-trance is absolutely central to the experience of synchronicities. I must say this is true for me. I don't know how it works with other people. C.G. Jung's experience was that the collective unconscious, despite its name, has what he called absolute or preconscious knowledge. In his Synchronicity article, which we recall forms the content of my first synchronicities described here, he quotes the Taoist scholar Zhuangzi, a contemporary of Plato. He writes, "The state in which ego and non-ego are no longer opposed is called the pivot of Tao." And he goes on to say that the prerequisite for achieving the Tao is the emptying of the soul, because it is precisely then that the Tao, the meaning, fills this emptiness. And finally, Jung ends the Zhuangzi quotation as follows. "If you have insight," says Zhuangzi, "you use your inner eye, your inner ear, to pierce to the heart of things and have no need of intellectual knowledge." And it's precisely in the use of the inner eye and the inner ear, that consists, Jung concludes, the experience of the absolute or preconscious knowledge, which, according to the depth psychologist, corresponds to, I quote, the microcosmic presence of macrocosmic events. In alchemy, the microcosm means the human body, the macrocosm, the world around us, as well as the universe. If we translate Jung's remark, we get the result that man, with the help of these just mentioned inner eye and inner ear, can perceive distant events, that is, he or she has telepathic abilities in the state of abaissement du niveau mental. The Taoists' emptying of the soul means, of course, like the Buddhist meditation, the emptying of the head soul, the logos consciousness. This happened to me at the time still completely unconsciously, concentrating on the heart soul. In this way, and only in this way, I was able to perceive the quiet twinge in the region of the heart. This quiet twinge in the area of the heart was a sign that the vegetative nervous system was activated. I think you call it more sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system, but with vegetative nervous system, we have the core of this system. It is vegetative. In Tantrism, 7 plexuses of this vegetative nervous system are described as so-called chakras. They correspond to the nerve plexuses, nodes of the autonomous nervous system, and form what is called the subtle body aspect of the completely inwardly directed nervous system. In my terminology, I call this inner aspect the vegetative body. Please show slide 11. Yeah, here you see at the left the chakras, the 7 chakras, and at the right you see the vegetative nervous system, and in red are shown the corresponding chakras. So, for example, the first chakra on the left side is here this chakra at the end of the coccyx, and so on. The heart chakra is what I experienced in my synchronicity, is located near the heart, and here it is symbolized as the seal of Solomon. This is interesting. It's exactly this seal which is the core content of the heart chakra. We thus find that in me at this moment, the eyes and the ears of the heart were activated. The very organs that Augustine had discovered in a kind of visionary state in some inhabitants of Hippo. Or those organs of which Chuang Tzu speaks and with whose help one can reach the Tao. This also gives a modern interpretation of the Far Eastern experience of reaching the Tao. This state corresponds to Chuang Tzu's state in which ego and non-ego are no longer opposed, or to the unification of the dimmed consciousness, the akephalos, with psychophysical reality, with unus mundus, the world of unity beyond the split into an outer and an inner world. In 1998, Michael Gershon, a physician and researcher who teaches at Columbia University, published his book, The Second Brain. In it, he hypothesizes that you have a second brain in the guts, which he also calls the belly brain. He calls it a brain because it consists of 100 million neurons, the same nerve cells that make up the brain. He was also able to show empirically that the belly brain controls the internal organs completely independently of the head brain. My experience, not least because of the synchronicity discussed here, has shown me that this belly brain or gut brain can also develop sensations, images, and ideas as I had perceived them. After I had left the head brain, the belly brain first expressed itself with the aforementioned twinge in the region of the heart, which then developed into a verbal utterance, indeed into an order to go immediately to the library of the Jung Institute to copy the article on Acephalos, the headless one. In addition to the ability discovered by Michael Gershon to control the internal organs independently of the head brain, the gut brain or belly brain obviously has the preconscious knowledge mentioned by Jung. In my case, it telepathically perceived that I would find the first edition of the journal Synchronicity next to the article about the Acephalos. It was only by spontaneously following this intuition that the synchronicity with the journal Synchronicity could arise. The synchronicity says that it is the dimmed consciousness that leads to the external event of synchronicity. The conscious dropping into the state of altered consciousness, into the state of headlessness of the Acephalos, thus leads to the possibility of increasing the number of experienced synchronicities. And this is exactly what I call Synchronicity Quest. It corresponds to the experience of preconscious knowledge, which according to Jung can be interpreted as the experience of the microcosmic presence of macrocosmic events, that is, as the experience of telepathic ability. But now, why was it my heart, of all things, that brought me the message that I should look for the Acephalos in the C.G. Jung Institute in Küsnacht, Zurich? This question is answered by Sufism, the mystical current of Islam. In Sufism, the heart is the mirror in which God can see himself, and is therefore the meeting point between the divine and the human. This statement is consistent with the fact that the meeting place with the divine in mysticism generally corresponds to the human heart. In Tantrism, it is the so-called heart chakra, the anahata, which corresponds to this function of unifying the human being with the divine, and is located in the middle between the lower three chakras and the upper three chakras, as you see on this slide. Thus, it also forms a symbol of the union of earth with the sky. In Hermetic alchemy, the alchemy of the medical doctors Paracelsus, Robert Flad, Gerardus Torneus, Michael Meyer, and others, this symbol corresponds to the seal of Solomon, or Star of David. It symbolizes the Hermetic opus, the work that leads to the conjunctio oppositorum, the union of opposites. As I have shown in my book, Holy Wedding, as a result of this union, man connects with the world soul, the feminine divine principle, the personification of the unus mundus, the psychophysical reality behind or even beyond the Cartesian division into outside and inside, which in my interpretation also corresponds to the beyond. I have also demonstrated this process in slide 3i, as you remember. It is ultimately this symbolism that prompted me to use the Anahata on the cover of the first volume of Return of the World Soul, published by Pauli Publishing in 2011. Please, slide 12. Yeah, here you see this Anahata chakra. Let me now recap the correspondences to Synchronicity Quest. In physiology, connection with the vegetative or autonomous belly brain or gut brain. In-depth psychology of C.G. Jung, a connection with the preconscious knowledge of the unconscious and with telepathy. In Hermetic alchemy, a unification with the unus mundus, or psychophysical reality. In mysticism in general, a unification with God in the heart instead of the head. In Daoism, unification with the Tao, and in Tantrism, unification with the heart chakra. Oh, I've forgotten slide 13. In slide 13, you can read all this again. Yeah. In my last publication, Holy Wedding, published by Pauli Publishing in 2017, I tried to show some sort of new mysticism based on the inclusion of Hermetic principles into the scientific worldview of the 21st century. In some way, this book is my legacy. This is why I dedicated it to the young generation of the 21st century. Slide 14, please. Yeah, this is what I like to tell you. Thank you very much. I have ended, huh? No. Yeah.
Right, sorry about that. Well, thank you so much, Remo, for that. Shantina, would you like to and say something? Or you're just muted?
I just like to say that the rest of the slides belongs to a second part, but it's too long because we have our hour.
That's okay. Shantina?
Yeah, I'd like to thank you, Remo.
Thank you.
For a great lecture, and maybe point out what struck me most. I was very much interested in this image of the headless man.
Yeah.
And it reminded me actually of a interesting coincidence that happened at Eranos.
Yeah.
And in, I believe in the 1990s, a Chinese psychologist named He-Yong Shen, who's later been like quite instrumental in spreading the Jungian psychology into China, came to one of the Eranos events, and he told a dream he had that night. And in his dream, he was headless. And his head was down on the table in front of him. And he was asking in the dream, but how do I see myself if my head is not there? And he was answering in the dream, because I see it with the eyes of the heart.
No, incredible.
Interesting, no? Seems like
perfect.
What you were. Yeah, so activating the eye and the ears of the heart. Thank you.
Yeah, this is the heart ego, the ego of the heart, of the right brain, we can also say. And for me, it's very important that I can distinguish between this logos ego with thinking as first function, and the eros ego with feeling as first function, and with the second function, what I call vegetative sensation, a sensation that is not the sensation of the body, of the gross body, and not the sensation of the surrounding, but the sensation of an inner aspect, deeply inner aspect of the body, what esoterics calls the subtle body, or also Chinese philosophy, the subtle body. I call it the vegetative body because we can, or I can, or also my clients learn to listen to this subtle body as I demonstrated in this synchronicity when I felt this inkling, this little, when I felt my heart or the heart chakra, and then went on to look at it and abandoned Logos head, and then became this task to go to the institute, Jung Institute, and there was this journal Synchronicity. This was incredible. And what did he say, this man, to this?
He said that in his dream, he was explaining the situation to himself. He was puzzled at first. He was like confused. And then it kind of, as kind of a satori, this idea came to him that I'm seeing with the eyes of the heart.
And I think this is also how we use I Ching.
Yeah.
Also with the eyes of the heart.
Right. The Chinese used to say like rolling the words of the oracle in your heart. We'll do that on one of these weekends. Do you feel that these perceptions and these understandings also changed your life, caused changes?
Completely.
Yeah.
What I wasn't able to describe, what is in the second part of this lecture, some 5-6 weeks after this synchronicity, I had another one. I, for the first time in my life, found the Tower of Jung in Bollingen. I looked for it 5 times and never have found it. And then I found it. And then there was I was there with my then girlfriend. And then we were outside the tower, and then redbreast came, a robin. In German it is red throat, so it has to do with the voice, with speaking, and it made a noise, an incredible noise, and we thought, oh, it wants to tell us something. And I didn't understand what, but it was in the surrounding of Jung's tower in Bollingen. And later I was invited to into the tower by a relative of J.G. Jung. And then I dreamt that I am in the tower, but it doesn't look like this tower of Jung. It is not a tower of stone, but it was a tower of, just a second. I don't find it now. A living, vegetative tower built of trees and branches, but they lived, they had roots, and this was my tower. And this way I found out that I have to much time later, I've seen that what Jung calls the self, the inner God image, is not the same as Jung's. Mine is what I today call the Eros self, which is rooted in the feeling. Because I'm a feeling type, this suits much better than Jung's Jung's definition. And what I forgot is then I also got after this meeting, let's say like this, with the red breast, with the robin, with the red throat in German. Some months later, I got a calendar of Swiss Institute that deals with birds, and on the first page, on the cover, a red breast. A red breast. But this is not enough. Then the photo was taken by a man with the name R. Roth. My name. And I didn't use my middle name then, so it was my name on this photo. So I knew I have to write about all these things, and then I began to write. It was the beginning of my career as a writer in Jungian things, and yeah.
Thank you, Remo.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I guess we can open up the question and answer.
Yeah, are we happy, Remo, to move on to Q&A and discussion straight away?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So as I said before, to ask a question, either use the raise your hand function on Zoom or physically raise your hand, and if I spot you can turn on your microphone.
Annette?
Yeah.
So I just have a sweet moment from yesterday that feels like it connects very well. I had picked up a newspaper, or local newspaper, and I called someone, and she was 90 years old, and I was reading her the story. And the title of the newspaper is called Observer. As I turned to where the story continued, there's a picture of a blue butterfly, right? Okay. And it says that there is a group that is putting a petition to protect the blue butterfly. Right? So I'm in the middle of reading her the story, and I'm like, there's a blue butterfly. And I hadn't yet read Richard's work. I hadn't read the article yet. I had just seen it. So I thought I had to share that with folks because it's just too fantastic. And I'd really been looking forward to the series. So that was not too much of a surprise, but it still was a surprise, and I loved it.
Great. Thank you, Annette. We have Joy has her hand up. Go ahead.
Let's see if I can make it go down. Okay. So Remo, this is such a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank
you. I was wondering if you could say a little more about when you said you felt, I'm thinking the word twinge. I don't remember now exactly what you said in your heart. And then words came, and I was wanting to know more about that, what you meant by that.
Yeah. Oh, this has to do with a special, what's this? Special, oh, you sure know the in Chinese or Indian medicine, they have the they have a special, they talk about the special aspect of what I call the subtle body. And I feel this point. I feel these points, and one of these points, which belongs to what I call the subtle body or the vegetative body, is here on the heart. I don't know if you can see it in the region of the heart. And when I concentrate on it, then words come, sentences come, and the pre-conscious knowledge, as Jung calls it. And in this way, it happened also in this situation that my heart knew what to do. And I followed this, spontaneously followed this. And in this way, it created a synchronicity. But also when I work with people, this has, yes, it has also to do with synchronicity, but when I work with people with a vegetative body, then they concentrate on what this Michael Gershon called the belly brain, and then they see images or hear voices, and they are not schizophrenic, and these voices, they come from the preconscious knowledge of the unconscious, or I would say from the preconscious knowledge of the psychophysical reality. So I can experience this with me and with my patients directly.
Thank you. Really interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a completely new world.
Does it seem like your own voice? I mean, do you hear a voice or you see words? Voice. Okay.
Like
does it seem
old prophets?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joe, for that. I believe we have Andrew has his hand up.
Okay, my question is going to be, how do you feel when you're in that state? Is it tiring? Can I just go back a bit? The reason I came to David Pete in the first place, to Paris, 25 years ago, was because I was confused, because I was a managing director of Marks and Spencer's. And I am autistic slightly and also dyslexic. And I can't think in a logical, linear, linguistic way. But somehow or other, I could envisage 14 million customers, 300 stores, 36,000 staff. I could go into a state. In fact, I used to enjoy it because I never used to concentrate on the one side of my brain that was trying to look for the answer. I was dreaming and I was thinking about possible futures and all sorts of things that could happen. In fact, it was so little work that when I was asleep, it was still working. I didn't have to sleep because it was playing. The other part of my brain that's looking for the answer is working like crazy and it gets exhausted and has to sleep. Now, if the corpus callosum in the middle, if the one that's looking for the answer looks at this playing one rather than saying, stop bloody playing, he thinks, shit, that's the answer. So the chairman of Marks and Spencer's said, look, Andrew doesn't know how to express himself properly. He talks a lot. He has all these millions of ideas, but he thinks in a way holistically that none of us can think about. So if you have a big problem, get him in a room, start talking to him. And if I used to try and concentrate, I couldn't do it. But if I just sort of let myself go, and people would say, Andrew, concentrate. We're trying to, spending our time. Chairman told me, and I said, well, I don't know why you don't blah, 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 blah. And I didn't know what I said. And then somebody said, did you hear what he said? He actually said, ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. And I said, yeah, that's a good idea. So my question is, and I'd love it to happen, do you feel that being in that state where you see these synchronicities is hard work, or, as I do, lovely?
No, not at all hard work. It's no work. It's it happens itself. It happens itself. It just does something, and I follow it. This is important, that I don't say, no, this is not true. I would like to do this and this, but not just to listen to it, to observe, and be patient, and be passive, very passive. And then something bigger works, talks, and in my explanation, this is what Jung calls the self, the bigger self, the God. Today I'm 77 now, I can talk about this, but with 50, I hadn't talked about this because people think you're crazy. You're crazy. You are in inflation. This was you're inflated, and today I don't worry about all these things. I feel that this is my way of being a mystic, a modern mystic, I would say. And
well, that's how David helped me. That I was it was in my 50s. I was scared. I didn't know what was going on. And I heard of David and Bohm, and I went to talk to David. David showed to me that this thing happens in both art and science. And if you actually put the art and science together, you could find these. And this is the creativity. And then the fact that Bohm, was looking for a different language to speak, because and in fact, now I'm 78, but it was David that helped me to get out of that fear and realize that it was a potential talent rather than something to be scared of. Sorry, I've talked too much.
And psychiatry should much more listen to this, and they always not always. The danger is that psychiatry devaluates this and says he is sick, and this is not true. This is not true. He or she is different. And we should learn, especially now in the 21st century, learn to listen to people who have this ability.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Andrew. Next person is Sharon.
Sharon?
Oh, you're so muted.
Can I see her?
Okay. I want to thank you, Remo, for sharing this. This is an experience that I have had because I'm involved in healing energy, and I've practiced healing touch, and I work with the group at a church in Calgary, Alberta. And some years ago, I wrote a little book, which I field tested on the children at the church in the Sunday school. Anyway, I called it Your Invisible Bodies, a reference for children and adults on human energy fields. And in that, about the third page in, I had a picture of the chakras, etc., and so forth. And I was really nervous about offering this to children and in a church. But, when I offered it, one of the girls who was about 12, she looked at the picture and she said, "Oh, chakras." And so she immediately normalized this. And I said, "How do you know about that?" And she says, "Oh, my mom's in the choir. And my mom's into all this stuff. And she's always talking about it." And the other kids had no problem with it. But this is the first time I've heard a person who, with your particular education, present this more scientific explanation of how this happens. And I've studied a little bit of Jung, and I was studying about archetypes and all that stuff. And I'm currently 84 years old. I did post a little bit about this book, but later when I worked with a group of people and we were selling our books at book fairs, one of the women said, "Well, that's really makes sense to adults as well as children." I got a lot of encouragement to do that little book from a fellow named Pietro Abella, who was my teacher at the Arc Institute. And when I went to take the course, he was demonstrating that the different energy fields of a person who was lying on a table. And I thought to myself, he's so matter of fact about this. Like because whenever I had tried to explain it, people looked at me as if I was crazy. And like you said, other people think you're crazy.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting. And the first time I tried to sell that book, it was the first edition. And one of the other fellows at the book display said, well, was this channeled? And I said, well, no, I knew all this stuff because I've taken lots of courses in psychology and and I said, no. But then when I thought about it later, I realized that it probably was channeled. And because everything came together and I wrote it in a weekend when I had nothing else to do. And one thing with energy healing is that you have to take your own ego out of it. When you perform energy healing, you just center. And in my case, we prayed because we have encouragement to study this from the point of view of following what Christ did, and because it sounds crazy, and a lot of people just think we're nuts. And a lot of people in our own congregation do, but there's been a handful who've come for regular treatments. So I am just delighted to hear your lecture because we realize I'm not crazy. I'm just me. And I'm just an ordinary woman, and I'm 84 years old, and I'm still learning. And so thank you so much. Thanks. That's all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon, for sharing this with us. Oh, Richard, you have your hand up. Oh, you're just muted for a sec.
Well, I feel that there's so much in that, Remo. I think it's one of the most exciting and also moving accounts, intellectually exciting, but also deeply moving. And that's my first response. And I would really like to ask if the Pauli Center could have you back again and do more. There's just a couple of things I wanted to explore a little bit further. One of them is that it strikes me that poetry is very much attuned to the kind of attentiveness that you're talking about. And I'm thinking here particularly of William Wordsworth, the great English Romantic poet, who very clearly entered the kind of state, the eros state that you're talking about. And I just thought I would throw something in, if I can find it. Yes, here we are. In the prelude, he talks about the song that he wants to write. And there's just a few lines. The song would speak of that interminable building reared by observation of affinities in objects where no brotherhood exists to passive minds. Observation of affinities in objects where no brotherhood exists to passive minds. Now, could I turn that into a question? Could you say more about associative thinking or feeling? In other words, the role of seeing affinities, comparisons in the kind of work that you're doing. That's just one of many questions, but I'll leave it at that, I think, for the moment.
Okay, in the interpretation of dreams, it's very important, this associative thinking or feeling or both. I learned from Marie-Louise von Franz that you cannot interpret the dream without the associations of the dreamer. Today, as much as I heard, many people, many psychotherapists just listen to the dream and tell you what it means. And this is completely wrong, because one needs this state between when one associates, and association means that you go into the right brain, and there similar things come, and suddenly, at least I feel it in this way, when people associate, suddenly I feel, oh, this is interpretation. And not by thinking, but it's just spontaneous, as the synchronicities happen. So I think this way of interpreting dreams is somehow synchronistic, at least spontaneous, that ideas come that I didn't have in my mind before. It just makes puff, it's here. And then I tell it to the patient, and when they can accept it, then my interpretation is correct. If not, it's not correct, or they are not not yet able to understand it. So I let it open. This is how I work with dreams, but I also work with the body, or the vegetative body, or the subtle body, and there the body associates. When, for example, here in my example of the synchronicity with synchronicity, my heart associated first with this twinge, I think, and then I concentrated on it without having anything in my mind. I just asked more or less asked my heart, what would you like to tell me? And then this command came: go to the Jung Institute and make a copy of this article about the headless. I didn't know why, and I didn't ask why. So I just went and to the institute, and there happened the second part, the outer part of the synchronicity. And in this way, synchronicities are created. I think that synchronicities are created when one is in this different mind, in this eros mind, eros consciousness, eros ego, whatever, in this dimmed state where one does have, and this is important, doesn't have any will to do something by will, and just let oneself flow. And I had a period in my life, I think after this synchronicity in 81, where I always lived in this synchronistic state. I went up in the morning full of dreams and didn't take a shower, because then I wouldn't have been in my in this altered state anymore, and went to town, and things happened all synchronistically. And this gave me the first time the orientation how to be in this, how I can stay in this creative state. It's an incredible intense state. And I think Pauli, who was, as we know, who was a co-founder of quantum physics, and completely in his head, but he felt, and I stress, underline 3 times, he felt that there is another energy. He wasn't able, he didn't talk about it because his colleagues would have called him crazy. But with von Franz and Jung, he talked about this, and in this book that I showed at the Atom and Archetype, he talks about this, that synchronicities have mana. Now, can you imagine a co-founder of quantum physics, completely full of mathematical formulas, talks about mana, which is a magic energy, which is in the Polynesiates, the energy, the life energy that doesn't exist in natural science. But he was forced to think about these things, but he wasn't able to go on because he didn't allow himself to let himself fall into this altered state. But what your question was, my answer was, also the body can associate, but it is a vegetative body, and here it first answered with this twinge, I think it's in English, and then even began to speak. And so I knew, and this was so deep that I knew now I must spontaneously, suddenly go to the institute. There is something very important. This is this feeling that some synchronicity is in the air.
Can I follow this up with just one more question?
Yeah.
So, as I've understood it, the Synchronicity Quest, as you've outlined it, is enormously profound and life-changing. And if you develop this facility, or this, perhaps facility is the wrong word, but if you can develop this Eros awareness, do you actually want to be in this state the whole time? Or can you turn it on at will? Can you train yourself as a yogi trains himself to be in this state continuously? And would you want to do that?
No.
Or would you prefer to come in and out of it and allow the surprises? I suppose behind my question is this sort of paradox that synchronicity to me seems to be an experience which always comes by surprise, and if you try to prepare it, it vanishes. If you try to analyze it, the scholars and the scientists, they don't seem to be able to handle it at all, because the moment they talk about it, it just vanishes. But you're talking about opening it up as a quest, as something that is
feeling
not willed, but actually willed in a kind of way that is unwilled, if you see what I mean.
I cannot train this. I never trained, I never did yoga or some, this is all too much, to me, it's all too much a training
system.
With the will, by will. And so I never did this, I just remain in this, or then remained in my state of half trance when I get up, when I wake up in the morning. And what I try is to remain in this state. And in when I talked about this, then I went to town, and I think I've seen people, not then, but afterwards, people who I know, they said, "Are you crazy? Are you crazy?" And I was in some sort, I was crazy, yeah, I was absent, I was in another world, in the unus mundus, without knowing it, 30 years ago or so. But in this way, I discovered all this other way of living in this world. But I wouldn't like to be there in this state ever, because then you cannot live a relationship. It's impossible. It's impossible. So then I must jump out and say, okay, now we are together, and I forget this. And but this is also the reason why I need so much time for me. There it was the whole morning. I didn't work in the morning, so I had the morning for me, and I could do what I wanted and liked, and so I created this, what I call today Synchronicity Quest.
Thank you, Richard, for that exchange. To move on to another question, I can see Angelita has her hand up. Hi, Angelita. Oh, you're still muted.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning from San Francisco, California. Bernal Hill, the unceded ancestral land of the Ohlone peoples. And I'm a guest here. So I have a lot of connections that I'm making with all of you, and I'm really grateful for that. And Don Sabutini describes Pari as a place where we can identify patterns that connect. And so I'm going to just speak to two things that hopefully will contribute to how we can connect. There have been some questions in the chat about Indigenous peoples and whether we are in this world of synchronicity. And the first thing I'd like to say is that I hope that we can stop using the past tense when we talk about Indigenous peoples, because we are still here. And one of my joys in joining you at Pari is to bring this voice from the Americas and to share with you that we are not the once great nations, we are the present nations, and we embody the once great nations. And so I'm trying to learn how to bring my knowing to your conversations. And so that's number one. Number two, or it's related. Anyway, I'm not going to number them. They're kind of flowing. My grandson, who I raised, is interviewing for PhD programs in neuroscience. And I guess he put native science somewhere in his, his application, because one of the professors asked him, what is neuroscience? No, what is native science? He must have put native science in his application. And the professor asked him, what is native science? And his reply, I laughed. His reply was, it's the way I was raised. And I thought, okay. So he made the interviews at these prestigious places. Let's see if there's a professor who's going to want to know more about that in the sort of molecular and submolecular research that he wants to do. So the answers and the opinions and what I'm sharing with you is based in native science, which is the way I was raised. It's a way of life. It's a way of people who have, for centuries, generations, been studying and reporting, much like the Book of Oracles that will be, or I call it the Book of Oracles, the I Ching. There are a lot of lot of new ways. Okay. So that's number one. There's no easy answers. We're still here. I'm so moved by your statement that perhaps if you live in synchronicity, you might be lonely, or that you had feelings of loneliness. Mm-hmm. When you said that, my hands just went to my chest because I know that loneliness. And I wanted to offer to you how I reacted when I read about the blue butterfly. In the way I was raised and in my science, when the butterfly landed on your finger, I became one with the butterfly. There was no distinction. Like here at Perry, we're not talking about building, nobody wants to build a bridge with me because that's be two separate entities and we'd be building some sort of Newtonian, bridge. But it's about connections and flow. And I think I immediately became part of that butterfly. Mm-hmm. So in the way that I walk through the world, I'm connected to everything. I don't think about it. I'm not altered. I just am. I am the earth under my feet. I am the wind. I am everything. So I don't think I've ever felt lonely when I'm walking in nature. I feel lonely sometimes in conversations like this. Not at Perry though, thank God, that's why I keep coming back. But, in my walkabout through the academy, mostly I just felt lonely because it comes down, I think, to what we consider information. And what is evidence? So if you don't consider synchronicity evidence or information, or if you're walking around not being open to syncretic, occurrences, or to another word I like, consilience, where things just jump together and form, maybe Wheeler would say, an it from the bit. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of ways to think about all of that. But it's just that I think in some ways we're taught not to consider synchronicity as information. So I wanted to offer that to you also as a way to go forward in living in a way that is connected to everything. There's a challenge in that also that I want to offer you. It feels really good to become the blue butterfly and to feel like the blue butterfly. But I also noticed that the blue butterfly came when the quote from Hitler appeared on the window. And so this way of living asks us to consider that we are also Hitler. This is the part that's really hard. There is no other. There is no separation. There is, in fact, no judgment, I think, to allow us to create that separation. So that's hard. I don't have any answers for that, but I think if we really took responsibility for everything that we consider information, every experience that we have, and we became accountable in a new way, that would be answering some of the questions that you're so beautifully putting this morning. And all of this conversation is just leading us into the legacy of the century and this pandemic drama that we're part of. Thank you. That's what I have to say this morning.
Thank you. Just a short answer. I quote Jung, C.G. Jung. I think with 80 or more, he wrote, "At times I feel as if I am spread out over the landscape and inside things, and am myself living in every tree, in the splashing of the waves, in the clouds, and the animals that come and go, in the procession of the seasons. Here is space for the spaceless kingdom of the worlds and the psyche's hinterland." this is what Jung said at the end of his life, how he feels sometimes in the tower. But he had to be very lonely there, alone and lonely. And then he had this feeling to be spread out in the universe, perhaps also in the universe.
Yes, may I just respond that I also read, I'm preparing for the synchronicity sessions on the I Ching. So I used what I call the old yellow book, and I went back and I read the foreword by Jung that he wrote in 1947. And in there even, he says, I'm 80 years old, so I don't care anymore. And I thought, you know what, maybe that's what it takes, is for us to figure out or to help each other not care about whatever it is that prevents us from feeling this way when we're 40 and 50. And that's the new world, maybe, that we need to help each other to create and support, even if it's in containers like this one of coherence that feels safe. But yes, I read that and I loved it. Thank you for bringing that up. It is a connection and a pattern.
Thank you, Angelita, for that. It was really important to say that, so thank you very much. Now, I know people still have questions. Unfortunately, we have just gone over, so I do have to close the session. I really do apologize for that. Remo, do you have any closing remarks before we finish?
I am very, very happy that the people resonate in this way, because, as I said, it's a lonely way to live. Only some few people, good friends of mine, can understand this and live it too. So I'm very, very happy that I have seen with this lecture that there are other people in the world who live in a similar way. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Remo. Yeah, and Shantina, do you have anything to say before we finish? There.
Well, just a big thank you to Remo and to everybody. It's been a lovely session and a passionate discussion. I feel we could go on for quite some way, but all right, we have a whole a sequence of 4 weekends in front of us. So onwards, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Shantina.
Great. Well, thank you once more, Remo, and thank you also for your presentation, putting your own life story into it. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us and participating in discussion. Before we go, I'd just like to make a few notices before we join again for this event. Firstly, we have opened a new circle on our online forum Sutra for this Synchronicity series, where you'll be able to discuss the topics presented with the other participants and keep asking questions and share your thoughts. This circle also does include the speakers, so you'll have the opportunity to communicate with them directly as well. If you haven't received this invitation, please do let us know and we'll send it to you straight away. Each speaker has provided additional material such as readings, viewings, activities in preparation for their session. Even if these are not mandatory, I do strongly recommend you have a look through this material, as they do contain some very interesting insights and it can provide a deeper understanding of each session to come. On that note, on the weekend of the 27th and 28th of February, we will have the weekend dedicated to the I Ching with Shantina Sabadini and Cruz Manya Sabadini. Because of time constrictions, it will be very difficult to perform the actual I Ching together online. So Shantina and Cruz have asked you if if you're able to perform the yarrow sticks process at home. So during the 2 sessions, we can concentrate on content and readings. So
or the coins.
Yes, or the coins, of course. For those who are attending these sessions, I recommend you all you do this this process and send all the results to Shantina as soon as you can. Finally, I hope to see you all tomorrow for our next session with Jean-Francois Benzina, who's here with us today, whose presentation is entitled Necessary Chances, Synchronicity in the Encounters That Transform Us, in the form of an interactive film. As always, you can contact us. To contact us, you can visit our website where we've got a contact us session, or you can send us an email straight to us at either james@paricenter.com or eleanor@paricenter.com. Email us about anything, whether it's about material you have not received or sutra invitations or anything like that. Again, thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you again soon here at the park.
James.
Thank you, James, very, very much.